What is going on, everyone? Happy Wednesday. Welcome in to GC Live at the Buzzer with your host, Jack Veltri. Oh boy, we have got a lot to talk about. What a game last night at CLA. In case you missed it, South Carolina, after not having a marquee type of win, a quad one win through the first 10 games of this season, the Gamecocks picked up a 91-88 win over the number 25 ranked Clemson Tigers last night to get that signature win they've been desperately needing all season long. But at the same time, they also get that quad one win, the first one of the year for the team. And now they've got that signature win, and they have a real chance to finish out non-conference play at 10-3 before SEC play starts. Which should be a really rigorous slate of games starting after the new year. But I hope you guys are all doing well, just like I am. We've got a lot to talk about from last night's game, a lot to break down. It was a thrilling game, to say the least. I mean, if you weren't at Colonial Life Arena last night, and go ahead and if you're watching this live, go ahead and share in the comments if you were at the game last night and what your thoughts were. We've got a lot to talk about. I'll be answering any questions you guys have or anything you guys want to talk about from the game. But, I mean, it was insane last night at CLA. I think the best crowd of the year by far. I said it on Twitter last night. It felt like the 2023-24 season with the vibes I was getting from that game. Like, obviously it was a great game, but like the crowd was into it. It felt like those SEC games earlier this year where, it's a really big game. South Carolina's doing well last season, and they got a good team coming into town, and the crowd's into it. It's packed. That was what it was like last night for those of you who weren't there. It was insane. Every play, the crowd is going nuts. Anytime Clemson has a turnover or South Carolina makes a shot or whatever, even when the Gamecocks won the game, it was insane. Very good time at the game last night, and kudos to anyone that went, especially the students. I know they're on winter break right now and stuff, Christmas break that is, but really big shout out to them for showing up, and of course the fan base in general coming out to pack out CLA, and it was a great time last night. So lots to get into from this game. But first, I want to talk to you guys about our main sponsor right above me here, Clint Hammond of CMG Home Loans. So if you're like me, you're living in an apartment right now, but maybe you're further along in the process than I am, and you want to purchase a home. Maybe you want to take that next step and have your own place, your own space, and all that sort of stuff, but you don't know where to begin. Or maybe you also have a mortgage to pay, but you don't know where to start. Well, Clint Hammond of CMG Home Loans can help you out, take you through the process step by step, and get you situated in the right manner. He's a lifelong Gamecock fan. He's a longtime supporter of Gamecock Central. He's got more than 20 years of experience in the mortgage industry. So if you're interested, give him a call, 803-422-6797. The NMLS number for him is 71597, or go to clinthammond.com for more info. So that is all good right there. And also, while we're at it, I want to talk to you guys about our silly season sale, $1 for 7 days. If you're not already and you're listening to this stream, you're not subscribed to GamecockCentral.com, right now is the perfect time to do so. Join the team, join the family. It is awesome over there. We've got so much going on. Plenty of basketball coverage, obviously, from last night's win at Colonial Life Arena over the Clemson Tigers. But we also are in the thick of it with the transfer portal, bowl game coming up for South Carolina football in just a few weeks. We have nonstop 24/7 coverage on the site. It is a great time to join if you are not joined or not subscribed already. Again, it's $1 for 7 days. If you just want to join for a week, it'll only cost you $1. That's four quarters. So that's really good value right there for your money. And of course, it's good coverage. It gets you exclusive access to all of our premium stories about the portal, what guys are in, who is on visits right now for South Carolina football, and what to expect with those guys. And then, of course, we've got all the basketball stories. Going to have some baseball content coming out here soon. And of course, for those of you listening, I did on Sunday, I talked about a little bit of recruiting with men's basketball and stuff. And I was at the Bash last week for Eli Ellis and Hayden Assemian, 2 signees in the 2025 class for men's basketball. I have some stories coming out with those guys here pretty soon, so you'll definitely want to be checked in for that. And that is all part of the silly season sale. That's what you get out of that. And, of course, you get great interaction on the Insiders Forum with Gamecock fans that are crazy just like yourself. So if you're not already, long-winded answer there, but if you're not already, go ahead, subscribe to GamecockCentral.com. And also, while we're out of here, just one last thing before we dive into hoops. Go ahead and give this video a thumbs up if you're enjoying what you're listening to about this game last night. And also, subscribe to our YouTube channel. It takes literally 2 seconds. Just click out of this video real quick. I'm not going anywhere. We're going to be here talking hoops for a good bit. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Give this video a thumbs up if you're enjoying it. And yeah, it'll literally take you 5 to 10 seconds. I promise. It's really quick. All right, let's get into this game. Again, hope you guys are all doing well. Appreciate you guys taking the time to tune in. I mean, where do we even start? This was a phenomenal game for South Carolina last night. Had a lot of mistakes at times. Wasn't the cleanest game for sure. The first half, you got off to a real quick start. South Carolina was up by double digits, seemingly it felt like right out of the gate. They went on the first half was really made of long scoring runs, right? I think South Carolina had 2 of them last night where they go on these nice long runs. The first one, they get up by double digits. Then Clemson responds and ties the game at 24. And then South Carolina responds and punches back with a nice 10-0 run, capped off by Jordan Butler, who had to come in for a little bit last night. Only played 1 minute. But his minute on the floor was very valuable in that South Carolina was dealing with some foul trouble. Guys like Colin Murray-Boyles, who we'll talk about here in a little bit, had 3 fouls in the first half. And Nick Pringle was getting some fouls, and so was Zach Davis. You had to rely on some other guys that maybe don't play a ton, get into the game last night, and a guy like Jordan Butler made a really big impact, drawing 2 fouls and going to the line for 4 free throws, which he made all of them. So, in a game where you win by 3 points in overtime, obviously, look, at least points came in the first half, but look at the final score. Those are the points that seemingly make the difference. So, definitely good to see a guy like that come in and make an impact. And Jeff 2001 is right. He hit 4 big free throws. Yep, you're right on the money about that. Very good to see a guy like Jordan Butler come in for, granted, only 1 minute, but his time on the floor was very important. And Rhett says, pointing out the obvious here, the officiating was not good on either side. Yeah, anytime you have someone like a Pat Adams or I think it was Joe Lindsay, guys like that officiating games, you're in for a real, I'm joking around when I say this, but like a real treat because you're going to get a ton of foul calls. There's a lot of stoppage in the game. And it's instead of like an hour and a half, 2-hour game, you're dragging it out for an extra 20, 30 minutes with all these ridiculous foul calls, going to the monitor, take a million reviews and take all the time in the world. I mean, it didn't help that game went to overtime, but I mean, that game probably could have been a lot quicker had there not been 44 foul calls. I mean, some of them were ticky-tacky. Some of them were just questionable, to say the least. And it was absolutely ridiculous. But you know what? South Carolina got the win, and that's really what matters most. Like, we can talk about the officiating all day long, but it really was a great game from start to finish. And Rhett also points out, good crowd last night, maybe 12K, very vocal. Great seeing support from Beamer, Staley, the girls team. It's good time to be a Gamecock fan. Also saw BJ Mack last night. Yeah, BJ was there, former Gamecock from last season. He was in the crowd. Hayden Assemian, 2025 signee, was there last night. He posted that on his Twitter yesterday that he would be at the game. Not sure if any other signees were at the game last night. Trying to get that kind of figured out here and situated. Might have something to come on Gamecock Central about that. But, great crowd last night. Again, it wasn't like packed to the brim, but I kind of noticed in the final minutes right before tip-off that, like, okay, like the upper deck, you got some fans up there. And keep in mind, like the women's team, they have no problem packing it out because obviously they are who they are. They're a great team, number 1 team in the country more times than not, and they're coming off a national championship. So, of course, the women's games are going to be packed. But the men's side, you would think after having the success this team did last year, winning 26 games, you would think there would be a better crowd in attendance for these early season games. And it took up until last night, there weren't many great crowds. Like the season opener was decent against North Florida, but like the crowds had not been very good for South Carolina this year for the men's side. Not just being completely honest, like it or not, it's just the facts of the matter. But last night, great crowd on hand. Obviously, playing your in-state rival has a lot to do with that. Clemson fans seemingly traveled well, but there were a lot of Gamecock fans in attendance last night, and they got treated to a great game. And again, like I said before, it felt very much like last year when you're in the thick of it in SEC play, and you got these great games, top 25 matchups at hand, a lot on the line when the team is good, and the crowd shows up. Again, everyone loves a winner, not to say that people don't people don't care about this team when they lose. Like, obviously there's some truth to that in my opinion. When they lost the season opener in North Florida, I think most people probably checked out for a minute, even though this team was coming off such a historic season last year. But again, winning isn't usually the culture around here for South Carolina. It's not the norm. South Carolina won 11 games 2 years ago, and last year winning 26 games was definitely a new feeling. But they're starting to get it going now. They're 8-3 on the year. They have that signature win, a quad one win over a Clemson team that is very good. Make no mistake about it. Clemson is a solid team. They gave South Carolina everything they had last night. And yes, they've lost 2 games in a row now, but they do have some great wins on the schedule. They beat, San Francisco. They beat Penn State, and of course, their signature win is over a top 5 Kentucky team. That is, in my opinion, one of the best teams in college basketball this season under Mark Pope and that staff there, replacing John Calipari. But Clemson is a solid team. They gave South Carolina all they had, and it was a great game last night, and it's good to see South Carolina finally prevail in one of these bigger games. R.L. Smith checking in. They say, do you think that the bad loss the first week of the season put a damper on things? Yes and no. I think to some extent that first loss of the year to North Florida in the season opener was not ideal by any means. You don't like losing to those types of teams. And North Florida is not as bad as maybe you would have thought. Like, they do have a win over Georgia Tech, but they are 7-5 on the year, and they're in the top, inside the top like 200 in KenPom. So I'm not sure where they're at in the net rankings right now. We'll get to the net in a little bit here with South Carolina, but look, it's probably going to go down as a quad 3 or quad 4 loss, and you really hope it's a quad 3. But even then, I don't think it's that big of a deal now, because I feel like the Clemson win kind of cancels it out to some extent. And look, as long as you take care of business in SEC play and you go about 500 or better, then you're fine. I think you will be fine and get into the tournament and all that good stuff. So it could linger, but if South Carolina handles business like everyone hopes they will, then it shouldn't even really matter, to be honest. And yeah, I get that from that standpoint of that feeling of, well, there goes their NCAA tournament chances. It's one game. Teams are going to lose to bad teams sometimes. That's college basketball. That's how it works in March Madness, when you see all these 11 seeds beating 6 seeds, and you get your Cinderella stories every single year, when teams like Virginia a bunch of years, like in 2019 or whatever year it was, 2018, losing to 16 seed UMBC. Stuff like that had never happened before, but then of course it did, and Virginia got boat raced by 20 points. So things happen. Anyone can catch fire at any time. Any team can win any given night. That's the beauty of college basketball. And South Carolina has definitely learned a lot since then. I think we've figured out a lot about this team since that season opener back in the first week of November, and they're a much better team, I think, because of that game. You never want to lose, but I do think had they not lost that game, I mean, I think they'd be fine. But Lamont Paris has pointed out before, it's a blessing in disguise that South Carolina lost that game. And I'm paraphrasing here, but South Carolina probably wouldn't have learned the valuable lessons that they did from that game, losing the way they did, and knowing that, like, okay, we got to pick up the pace, got to do better, this and that, more urgency. And I think that's what we've seen since that game. They've come along very nicely, and they've won 5 games in a row. Of course, it was capped off last night with a massive win over Clemson. And I think you got to start with, again, we talked about the first half a good bit, but that second half, look, fouls aside and stuff, I thought this was probably the best I've seen South Carolina play this season. Like, some of the runs they went on in this game in the first half were very solid. Like, you're holding Clemson scoreless for more than 5 minutes. Meanwhile, you're getting buckets. And, of course, I think everything with this team kind of starts with CMB, who had 22 points last night on 8 of 10 shooting, 9 rebounds, almost had a double-double, but he also had 2 blocks and a steal. He was massive last night for this team. And the important thing to keep in mind here is, as I'll pull up some stats from last night's game, courtesy of Stat Broadcast. I mean, here's some of the numbers here. I mean, like I said, he did have 22 points, but he also had 5 fouls, and he did foul out in overtime last night. It's crazy because he picked up 4 fouls rather quickly. He had 3 in the first half. He picked up his 4th only minutes into the second half, and you're kind of playing with this mentality of, okay, you're playing a little bit risky here if you put him in for an extended period of time because he could easily foul out, and that's the last thing you want, especially in a tight-knit game with your star player potentially sitting on the bench. And that's, South Carolina had to kind of adjust and make things work. You see in the first half when obviously Jordan Butler had to come in for a little bit, but at the same time, you also had, a smaller lineup out there, if you will. You had your, Nick Pringle in there as the big man, and then Miles Stute moved over to the 4. And we'll talk about Miles here in a bit because he was massive last night in the success for this team. But you had to kind of adjust last night a little bit with the fouls and the way they were being called. And, of course, you made it work in the second half when you had CMB out there for an extended period of time. He did have 13 points in that second half in 13 minutes. He only played 28 minutes last night, which may feel like a lot, but at the same time, when you have overtime and stuff and guys are playing 39, 40 minutes, it's not a lot of time. But he was able to really make a difference last night. And that's exactly what Clemson coach Brad Burnell said last night, is that CMB was the difference in the game with the way he played. He was not afraid to get into the paint, get physical, and even with 4 fouls, he was going one-on-one in the post against guys like Ian Shefflin and Victor Locken, and Locken only played 15 minutes last night. We'll get into the Clemson side of things with the fouls in a bit, but, I mean, look, CMB was a difference maker last night. He was in the paint, posting up a lot, making the tough shots. He's also very aware and cognizant of making the right passes when he needs to, kicking it out, and creating open looks for guys like Miles Stute, who, look, Miles had not scored in his last 2 games before last night. But, I mean, last night he had 19 points on 7 of 9 shooting, 5 of 7 from three-point range. He is money from the corner. I think that's just clearly obvious after last night. He had a lot of good looks from the corner of the floor, and he just was knocked down almost every single time. And it won't be talked about a ton in comparison to the big shots he hit last night, but he did have 2 massive rebounds in this game. I think the one of which came after Nick Pringle, I believe, missed 2 free throws right after Clemson had taken their first lead of the game. And you see Miles go right through Ian Shefflin to grab a rebound and go right back up for an easy 2-point basket. And then later in the game, with like 10 seconds left, Jacoby Wright misses a free throw, and it's at a critical point in the game where South Carolina is up by 2, and they have a chance to ice the game here with some free throws, but you miss those shots, and you go 1 of 4 on free throws in the final 10 seconds of the game, by the way, in regulation. That's a whole nother story for another day. But you miss those critical free throws, but Miles is able to give South Carolina some new life, get a critical rebound, and get the ball to Jamari Thomas for a chance to ice the game. And, of course, Jamari hit 1 of 2 free throws, and then we'll talk about this here now. Chase Hunter for Clemson, I mean, he was ridiculous last night. Absolutely phenomenal performance from the Clemson guard. I mean, he had 27 points last night on 9 of 18 shooting. He also had 5 threes made. His big shot of the night came with a few seconds left to go. He's racing down the floor after Thomas hits the free throw to take an 80-77 lead. He races down the floor, hurls up a deep 3-point shot, and it goes off the glass and goes through for a bank shot to tie the game at 80 right before time expired. And it was, I don't know what the thought process was there. We got more clarification on it after the game, but in that situation, you're typically supposed to foul up by 3, right? Because if you foul up by 3, there's no, shot from behind the arc or whatever. Clemson's going to the line for 2. And even if Hunter hits both shots at the free throw line, you're up by 1 point and you have like a few seconds left to go. You're basically playing a free throw game at that point. Like, if you take care of business at the line, and I can't remember what the timeout situation was at that point, but Clemson obviously didn't call a timeout in those final seconds. So I'm trying to remember, but I'm assuming they were out of timeouts in regulation. You're trying to make sure those guys don't hit a shot like they did. And after the game, Lamont was saying that the plan was they were going to foul up by 3, and they were going to let it play out if they were up by 4. But of course, you only made 1 of 2 free throws at the line with Thomas, and you were up by 3. And for whatever reason, they didn't foul, and you paid the price for it. And that really was a big mistake in the game. That cannot happen. I know they won the game last night, but that cannot happen. You do that in SEC play. You do that against a team that maybe is better than Clemson and can beat you in overtime and whatnot. You will not win games like that, making mistakes like that consistently. That is just my opinion on it, but I think it's true because I just don't understand the thought process there of not fouling. We've seen this team make a lot of mistakes throughout the season. I mean, last night is another example of that, but they're finding ways to win, and that's the important part. So you can overlook it, I guess, to some extent, the fact that they were able to persevere and win the game, all that, yada, yada, yada. At the same time, though, it didn't need to be that close. This game did not need to go to overtime. You hit those free throws, you win the game, no problem. Even when you're up by 3, just foul Hunter. I don't understand what they were thinking there. And they basically did the same thing again in overtime when they were up by 3, and Jamari Thomas does hit 2 free throws to give South Carolina a 3-point cushion. And Clemson's got no timeouts, and they're going down the floor, and Hunter hurls up another 3-point shot. I don't understand why you're not fouling there. Again, it probably drives you nuts as a college basketball fan because you're supposed to be fouling up by 3. All right. But again, Carolina paid the price for it last night in regulation. And of course, they had a good overtime period to win the game. And a big part of winning this game in overtime, I think, came down to the fact that Clemson had a lot of foul trouble. Like, you want to talk about South Carolina having issues with CMB and Pringle fouling out. I mean, Clemson was down 4 players last night because they had Dylan Hunter, who headbutted he headbutted Morris Ugasuk last night and got ejected. And, flop or not, I mean, I've seen the highlight from it. It did look like Morris kind of sold it a little bit to some extent. But, I mean, that's a dumb thing for Dylan Hunter to be doing in a close game in regulation. And he got kicked out of the game for it. And I totally understand that. But you're also down, and we'll take a look at the numbers here. I mean, you lost Shefflin in overtime to fouling out. Like I mentioned before, Victor Locken, transfer from Cincinnati, big man for Clemson, did not have any impact last night. 4 points on 1 of 7 shooting, 6 rebounds. He fouled out rather quickly in this game, and I mean, he was out of there by the end, closer to the end of the second half. But I mean, he wasn't playing a ton, 15 minutes, and he's on the floor for that period of time. I mean, it really was Chase Hunter last night doing a lot of the busy work, and Jaden Zachary also fouled out. So you're down 3 starters pretty much for most of overtime. I mean, Locken and Zachary were already done before at the end of regulation. Then Shefflin fouls out a few minutes into overtime. But not having those 3 guys out there, plus Dylan Hunter, I think was really, really big for South Carolina. And, of course, I know Pringle and CMB both fouled out in OT, but it really did make a difference that the guys for Clemson, the star players for them, weren't out there for a little bit of this game. And it allowed guys like CMB and others to really take over. And win this game. And in overtime, I mean, look, Carolina came out of the gates playing really well. I mean, you had, I think you were up by 7 at one point in that extra period. It starts with Morris Ugasuk making a 3, and then Colin Murray Boyles hits 2 free throws. Jacoby Wright makes a layup. Jamari Thomas makes a layup. You're up 89-82 with 1:40 to go. And then just Chase Hunter hits a 3-pointer and gets 2 free throws. And it's a 2-point game with 50 seconds to go. And again, keep in mind, the big men that were out for Clemson, again, they were down their starting front court going into the final minute of overtime. And you got to rely on Christian Reeves, a guy that doesn't play a ton for Clemson, more like a reserve. It's kind of like if, when Jordan Butler had to come in for South Carolina last night. It's kind of like that in the sense of, he's a guy that, Reeves, he's a 7'2" big man, sophomore from Charlotte, but he doesn't play a ton for Clemson. And it's kind of like he got thrown into the fire there, had to play some big minutes for the Tigers in overtime. And he gets sent to the line after Chase Hunter drives to the basket, and, Reeves gets fouled on the way up for a rebound, trying to put back the ball into the rim. He gets fouled, and South Carolina's up by, I think it was 2 by that point, so 89-87. He goes 1 for 2 at the free throw line with 3 seconds left to go. And that kind of allowed Carolina to win this game by that point, because Jamari Thomas was fouled on the other end and knocked down 2 free throws to win this game. So, I mean, look, this was a really tight game, and losing some key players for Clemson, it's one of the main differences in this game. Of course, I think South Carolina played really well and deserved to win this game just based on the way they played alone. But, I mean, it does help, obviously, when you're able to take some of the better players from the other team out of action for a little bit. So, good win for the Gamecocks last night. I was very impressed with how things went from that standpoint. I think you did a good job of creating turnovers and mistakes by the Tigers. You played really well in that first half, and you were up going into the break. I mean, you led for 38 and a half minutes of this game. That's crazy. Clemson only led for just over 2 minutes. Just think about that. For as tight as this game was, South Carolina typically had the upper hand and was usually in front and had control. So that's what you want to see from this team. I think that was probably their best game of the season thus far. Obviously, they're one of the better, higher scoring games of the year, which, with this team, it's typically mid-70s and a lot more defensive play and all that. But last night was one of those games where, you got to score buckets, and that's what you did last night. You get 91 points. So overall, great win for the team, and you're now 8-3. You're starting to reap some of the rewards of that win last night. Like I said before, it's a quad 1 win. You now have that win that you really have been needing, because before last night, you didn't have a quad 1 or quad 2 win, and you get that. A lot of teams by this point maybe have 2, 3, 4 wins of that magnitude. And granted, it's because these other teams around the country are playing these great schedules, game in, game out, obviously with some mid-majors mixed in there. But, South Carolina's had their opportunities to win these types of games, and maybe at this point they could have been at that 3 to 4 win mark with these big type of quad 1 wins. But you lost to teams like Indiana and Xavier, and those were your crucial opportunities. And, of course, you've beaten other ACC teams like Virginia Tech and Boston College, but those aren't going to go down as your marquee wins. I mean, those are big, but because it's the ACC, and the ACC is one of the better conferences in basketball. But your real money opportunity is going to come. Obviously, last night was a big one. You're going to have a real opportunity here in SEC play to get those marquee wins and get to where you want to go. I saw a coworker of mine, Kevin Miller, brought this up earlier today. He mentioned that with the net, and we'll talk about it here in a second, all 18 SEC games for South Carolina are quad 1 and quad 2. So 16 of them are going to be quad 1 opportunities as of right now, which is, if Carolina can win, I think if you finish about 500 in SEC play, I think you're making the tournament. Because at that point, let's assume Carolina beats Radford on Sunday and then Presbyterian on the 30th to round out non-con. You're 10-3. You win about 9 to 10 games, heck, even 8 games. I 10, 9 or 10 or more, I think you're a lock for the tournament. I think it would be too hard, even with how good the SEC is this year and how many teams are probably going to get at-large bids besides the conference champion. You're probably looking at a double-digit bid league. I think it would not be unrealistic to say, like, yeah, South Carolina is, you know, kind of towards the bottom end of the totem pole, near last in the SEC in terms of like record. I think they're like the only team with 3 losses right now and stuff. But obviously, a lot can change, and if you get to about 9 to 10 wins in conference play, doesn't need to be 13 wins like you had last year in SEC play. You get 9 to 10 wins, and then you add another one in Nashville for the SEC tournament. You're a lock to make the tournament. That's just my opinion. I'd be shocked if Carolina got left out if they finished 500 in league play and then won a game or two in Nashville. I'd be shocked if they got left out, even if they didn't win a game out in the SEC tournament. If you finish about 500 in SEC during the regular season in that 18 game grind where you got so many quad one opportunities, like by the end of SEC play, if you finish with that many wins, you're probably going to have about, including Clemson, you'll probably have about double-digit quad one and quad two wins, and that should get you into the tournament, like I said before. But there's a long way to go. South Carolina, as it stands right now, is ranked 84th in the net. And that's a great metric to see how teams are ranked and all that. And again, you can look at the AP poll if you want, but I don't think the AP poll does much help in the grander scheme of the college basketball picture. Here's the thing, though. While South Carolina moved up 15 spots in the net after last night's win over Clemson, the other 15 teams in the conference are all ahead right now, and they're all ranked inside the top 60. Like, you got Auburn at 1, Tennessee at 2, Florida 6, Kentucky 8, Bama 10, Mississippi State 19, Texas A&M 22, Ole Miss 24, Georgia 25, Missouri 33, Texas 43, Oklahoma 44, Arkansas 46, Vanderbilt 55, and LSU rounding things out at 58. And then you got South Carolina all the way about 30 spots back at 84. So it may look bad from that standpoint of South Carolina is kind of behind everyone else right now in the pack. But at the same time, you're going to have your opportunities coming up to where you beat some of these teams in front of you, you're moving up in the net. And it wouldn't shock me by a year's end if you get to that 9-10 win plateau of SEC, you're probably sitting comfortably, probably towards the middle of the pack in this conference in the net. And again, I think this is probably the best conference in college basketball this season. You could say everything you want about the Big East, the ACC, Big Ten, all these other power conferences around the sport. But I will say the SEC is on a different level this season. And I think this is a conference that, like I said before, it would not shock me if we see a record amount of auto or at-large bids when it comes to the field for March Madness. It would not shock me. And South Carolina has a long way to go, but this is a step in the right direction, and it's one that is definitely going to help them get into the fold. Like, again, there's a long way to go, but you're in the conversation, I think, now. Like, one loss is not going to change everything. You're not going to probably be in Joe Lunardi's bracketology, predictions whenever the next one comes out. That's just not realistic. But you are going to start getting a little bit more notoriety after winning a game like this because you proved that you can win one of these big games now. And I think that really bodes well for SEC play. Like, you have that coming up in 2 weeks from Saturday. Like, you go to Starkville to play Mississippi State. That's going to be a big game. And you have an opportunity to go out and get off to a good start in conference play and rack up some of these big wins. You're playing a team like Mississippi State. That's going to be a quad one win, especially considering it would be in Starkville. You get more of those types of games and you win them, you're in a really good spot moving forward. And we're going to have to see what happens. But again, last night, huge way to get things going. And I think it does. I asked Lamont about this last night. Does he feel like this comes at the perfect time for South Carolina to get this type of win right before everything picks up? in just a few weeks. And he said, yeah, like it really does. Like, again, he doesn't like to like look at the rankings and stuff. But it's hard not to notice that, South Carolina, they were ranked last year for a good portion of the season. And when they got ranked, they never were not ranked again. So they have there's like, again, the AP poll, I wouldn't put too much stock into it. If South Carolina, even if they did get ranked, it's a great metric to see how far South Carolina has come this year. If they ever end up getting ranked by the AP poll later this year, that's a whole nother discussion. But the net, you definitely want to see this team continue to go, trend upwards that way in the net, and they're doing so. Again, they've jumped up 23 spots since December 15th. That was 3 days ago. That is really good progress, and still a long way to go, but it's a good sign that you're starting to, you're on a 5-game winning streak. You're beating, 3 of your last 5 wins have come against ACC teams. That's really solid stuff right there. Again, Clemson, that win over them, that is going to hold some real value. Like last time I checked, I'll take another look here real quick. Clemson last night when I looked was number 19 in the net rankings. So, and right now they're at 26 right now. But even still, that's a win right there for South Carolina that is going to go down as one of these quad 1 wins, I think, by year's end. And I'm not saying root for Clemson to do well, but in the back of your mind, you're like, okay, any of these teams that you have beaten this year or even lost to, you hope they do well, so that way it kind of helps boost your resume. Like North Florida, for instance, they're 7-5 right now, but if that's a quad 3 win by year's end, or I'm sorry, quad 3 loss by year's end, that really helps South Carolina, and it doesn't look as bad if it were a quad 4 loss. Still bad to some extent, but not as bad as it could be. And it's the same thing with Clemson. Like that win right now is holding a lot of value. If Clemson just stinks it up the rest of the year and they don't win another game, that win doesn't hold as much value. We'll see what happens. I don't know what they would be, how that would be measured, but you just hope Clemson keeps playing good basketball because they're a good team, and it'll let everything happen as it may. And South Carolina, if they win enough games here, they'll be fine. I think that is the good thing, is that this team's on track, and I don't know what it's going to take to get into the tournament. I really don't, but I do deep down humbly believe that you finish 9-10 wins in conference play, I think you get in to the big dance. So other things that stood out, in general, Carolina obviously is back in action on Sunday. Weird time, a Sunday game, which I don't really remember the last time they've played on a Sunday. Doesn't feel like they usually do very often. They usually play on Saturdays around here, and the women play on Sundays. But this weekend, they're playing on Sunday at 2 p.m. against Radford. Should win that game, hopefully pretty comfortably. And then you get Presbyterian after Christmas break, and then it's off to SEC play. And that is going to be a real gauntlet. But it is good to see, number one, Colin Murray-Boyles continuing to play the way he has. He has just been so dynamic for this team this year. Everything he's done has been phenomenal. And I think we're witnessing a potential lottery pick in the NBA draft come next summer. I think that's the way it's going to go. I think he's going to go to the draft, and look, that's a big loss for Carolina, but I think people kind of knew that was going to be the case if that ends up happening. But it's good to see other guys contributing, like Nick Pringle, 18 points on 7 of 8 shooting last night. He did have the 5 fouls, but he was very good last night. He got off to such a good start in that game. And I do wonder what he would have done had he not had a few fouls that kind of put him on the bench for a little bit. But he was great. Miles Studi, I think if I had to pick a player of the game from last night, obviously CMB is probably that dude for sure. But I do feel like deep down, look at the numbers here. I really do I do feel like Studi, South Carolina doesn't win that game without him. Like, you could say the same for CMB and Pringle and all that, but the timeliness of those 3-point shots that Studi hit, plus the big rebounding he did in this game, I think that really should not go unnoticed. And if I had to pick a player of the game, it'd probably be Studi, just because, again, he had been shooting 29% from the field before last night and was really, really struggling. Like, really, really struggling. Like, he had averaged, I think, like 4.5 points before last night. so far this year. But he really came through last night and had a tremendous game. That's what you like to see. And Jamari Thomas has shot 2 of 11 from the field, 0 of 5 from 3. And everyone probably was going to make the comparison that he's no Talon Cooper, this and that. I will say, yeah, I agree. Talon Cooper feels like one of one, a real floor general that can do just about everything. But there is something to be said about how well Jamari plays on both ends of the floor. Like, he's able to get to the line. He went 7 of 10 at the free throw line last night. He's a pretty good rebounder. He can rack up the assists. And also, he had 3 steals last night. He's very good on both ends of the floor, and he played 41 minutes last night. Him and Jacoby Wright each played that long. And I think, look, the guard play hasn't been amazing this year by any means. You'd like to see more from those guys. I know people keep bringing up you want to see more from Cam Scott, who played 6 minutes last night. But he's a freshman. I don't think he's going to end up playing a ton right now for Carolina with so many other guys out there. And Morris Sukasuk had a nice role for Carolina this year. You'd like to see the guard play be a little bit more consistent, but last night, for what it's worth, I think it was a good step in the right direction. I consider Studi to be a part of that guard mix as well, even though he's kind of like listed as a forward now for Carolina. And also keep in mind, Zach Davis was also in foul trouble last night. He didn't do anything last night. I mean, he had more fouls than combined, more fouls than points, rebounds, and assists. So, he didn't have a single point, no rebounds, no assists, 4 fouls in 9 minutes. So, he got into foul trouble real quick in this game, and that kind of reduced his role significantly. But again, you're seeing other guys come in there, make an impact. I mean, BBV, Jordan Butler, guys like that. Morris playing a lot of minutes last night. This is what it might happen from time to time. You might have guys in foul trouble, but it's a good sign. If anything has been learned from last night, you have depth and you have enough talent, I think, to overcome some of the issues with the fouling and whatnot. And I think that is a really, really good sign. And I'm glad this is brought up. Big Red says Carolina baseball needs to complete the sweep against the Tigers. Yes. I forgot to mention this at the beginning. I'm glad you brought it up, Big Red. South Carolina right now in the Palmetto series has a record of 4-0-2. The 2 ties, I think, have come in soccer, but you've got wins in many other sports right now. Clemson doesn't have a single win in the rivalry right now. And obviously football, volleyball, men's basketball, women's basketball are those wins for South Carolina against Clemson. And you got baseball coming up in just a little bit here. Opening day is right around the corner, less than 2 months away. And then the rivalry weekend series, which will start out, I believe it starts out at Clemson, if I'm not mistaken, and then goes to Greenville, and then we'll come back to Founders Park to wrap up the weekend series. And yeah, I mean, look, you win 2 out of 3 that weekend. That's usually the real benchmark to see where the team is at in the baseball world, because non-conference play is usually a lot of let's be honest, a lot of easier opponents to play. But Clemson's going to be a real test, considering they were 1 win away from going to Omaha last year, and maybe it was 2 wins. I know that they played Florida and lost that series, but maybe they got swept. But look, Clemson's a good team, and they're really good in all sports. I mean, they're going to the college football playoff in football. Their basketball team is really solid too, even despite losing last night. In baseball, they're going to be good again this year. So those are the 3 main sports that everyone really does care about. And if it helps, look, there's going to be a lot more eyeballs than there probably already were on this baseball series come late February going into March. And that is a really good sign. And a lot will be on the line that weekend when these 2 teams play, with a chance to, look, there's other matchups between now and then with Carolina and Clemson, but the main one that everyone's going to be really honing in on is going to be the baseball series, and softball too, obviously, but the baseball series is the next big one, and that is going to be huge. And we got a lot of time till then, but it is good to see Carolina continuing to dominate Clemson. So I think that's going to do it for today's episode of At the Buzzer. A lot of good talk right there about this game last night. We're going to try to get back on more of a normal schedule doing these shows. Next week, I don't believe we're going to do a show just because obviously it's Christmas. And number two, next Wednesday is Christmas. We're not doing a show on Christmas Day. But also the team doesn't play. They play Sunday, and we'll do some Sunday reset, obviously. Maybe we'll recap this game and whatnot against Radford on Sunday. But there's also, they don't play until the 30th. So they're on break for 8 days. So there's not a whole lot to talk about next week. And then also couple that with the fact that, I'm going to Orlando for the bowl game and stuff for football. We got a lot going on with football and stuff at that point. So and we'll have obviously all coverage on Gamecock Central for basketball. But in terms of the live show next week, we'll probably start picking those back up after the new year, and we'll get ready for SEC play and all that good stuff. And speaking of which, Big Red asks before we get out of here, what do we need to do to stay in the mix in men's basketball conference-wise? Like I said before, Big Red, I think about 9 to 10 wins, maybe even 8 at the minimum in SEC play will get you in a great spot to be in a factor for an at-large bid in the NCAA tournament. And again, they're going to be I don't know how many teams are going to end up making the tournament from the SEC as at-large bids. I just wonder, is it if they're, I just don't know, because right now South Carolina, like I said before, is ranked last amongst SEC teams in the net at 84. But let's say Carolina gets that 9-10 win mark. I think it's hard to leave the Gamecocks out, and then depending on how other teams do, I think you can't leave them out if they get to that point. And I don't know. We'll see what happens, but I think somewhere between 8 to 10 wins, 10 at the best or more would for sure get you in. But 8 to 9, it makes the argument pretty convincing that Carolina, as a 19 to 20 win team with a lot of quad 1, quad 2 wins by that point, should get in. And then R.L. Smith asks, before you go, any transfer portal news? In terms of basketball, no. But, I know what you're talking about here with football. Obviously there's a lot going on, but, obviously if you want to go to GamecockCentral.com. Like I said before, $1 for 7 days. Great deal. We have a lot going on over there. There are a lot of guys coming in on visits here over these next few days. I know some guys have already gone on visits and stuff to South Carolina, and that's all good, all that good stuff. We'll have more of a recap on that sort of stuff with the football talk, because Kendall Smith and I are going live later today at 3:30 p.m. We'll break down. Mike Shula will be introduced as the next offensive coordinator later this afternoon at 1 p.m. So we'll have updates on Gamecock Central about that. But then at 3:30, we'll go live on GC Live to talk that, plus a little bit of the transfer portal and stuff. So I hate to be that guy, but we'll give you more info on that once we get to that show there, because this is a little bit about basketball. So Merry early Christmas to you, Big Red. I appreciate it. So that is now going to do it for today's edition of GC Live at the Buzzer. Appreciate you guys tuning in. Again, like I said before, we'll probably, the next episode of this show will probably be after the new year, but you can look forward to Sunday Reset on Sunday to probably break down South Carolina's hopeful win against Bradford in men's basketball. And we'll have a lot to talk about from that game, along with football, of course, as the Gamecocks get ready for their bowl game on the 31st. So appreciate all of you guys tuning in. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your week. Happy early Merry Christmas, and I will see you guys again soon. Thanks so much. Have a good one.